Welcome back to this special correspondence edition of Off the Record with a busy news week in our town. Our lead story, back-to-back visits by Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump. And Ford hits the pause button on that battery plant in Marshall. On the OTR panel, Dave Boucher, Lauren Gibbons, Alyssa Burr, and Chad Livengood. Sit in with us as we get the inside out. Off the Record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Welcome back to Off the Record from Studio C. So we haven't done this in a long time. On a scale of 1 to 10, the question is, the historic event in Michigan this week of having a president in town, back-to-back with a former president, 20 years from now, that will be how important?
I would say maybe a 2 or a 3.
Yeah, okay, 2 or 3.
Yeah, like I'll give it a 3 or a 4.
All right.
I'll give it a 3.
I'll say 5.
Yeah, no, it's way too high. You'll find that something else to tell your grandkids about. It was, however, an unusual event.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, obviously all eyes are on Michigan right now with the UAW strike, and certainly both Democrats and Republicans, Trump specifically, saw an opportunity here. Biden to actually go and support the picketers, Trump to do, one of his signature rallies, if you will, trying to rev up the Macomb County contingent that helped him win in 2016. So certainly notable for the week and notable for the strike cycle. It certainly brings a lot of attention to some of the tensions going on right now as they work to get a contract together.
And I think if you ask that same question to some of the executives at the Big Three, you'd get a very different answer. I know that my colleague Phoebe Wohlhauer talked to Bill Ford, and Ford's very angry that both Biden and Trump came to Michigan. He thinks that they're fomenting dissent on the line in this very heated negotiation in a way that's not going to help the parties. And so this was a monumental event for these companies and, of course, for the UAW to have this sort of, especially President Biden, come in and not only help them on the line, but talk about the fact that they deserve a 40% raise. Like that's a huge moment for the union and their push.
Why did he do that?
Why do you think the president came in to support the union? I think we've heard a lot. I mean, it's no shock that President Biden is supporting a union, right? And like we have heard about, while sitting presidents haven't gone to a picket line, they of course have been endorsed by a union, right? I think that there's arguably some political upside to become and speak with the union. I don't think that he's necessarily going to lose the votes of the people who are supportive of Ford or GM, the company itself. And of course, we know that former President Trump had announced that he was coming to Michigan as well. So there's a little bit of gamesmanship there, too.
Well, and I was just going to say, you got to think about how massive UAW's membership is, over 100,000 members. The UAW has yet to endorse a presidential candidate for 2024. So with Trump and Biden being the front runners for their parties, it's essential for them to get out in front of these voters and state their case.
Do you think the president of the UAW whispered in the president's ear, you're going to get the endorsement, but I've got to play this game out?
Well, I don't make predictions about things I don't know, but I do know that the rules of this strike are completely out the door. Of normal rules, customary rules, usually at the beginning of negotiations, the UAW president and the president they do the handshake.
Hands across
the table. There was no handshake. I mean, all the chumminess of the past, and don't forget, this is the backdrop of this. The past negotiations have proven out to have been corrupt. That the UAW leadership was getting bribed by executives at the Big Three, particularly at FCA Stellantis, and some of those folks already went to prison, and now they're already out, of course. But that really showed. I mean, Sean Fain is fighting a two-front war. He's got to keep his union intact, his coalition intact, and there's a lot of people that distrust the union leadership, because of all the corruption in the past, they think that they've basically been sold down the river. and they're going to keep fighting this. Then they've come up with this whole strategy, this targeted strategy where they're striking all three at the same time, and they're picking plants. And today we're taping on Friday. They're supposed to add more plants today. They're going to intensify this thing. So yeah, he might be whispering in the president's ear, "Don't worry, we got your back." But at the same time, he has to basically put the gas, the pedal to all sides, and try to and that's why the auto executives like Bill Ford, they are just struggling. They have never seen anything like this before, and so then they have the two leading political figures of the country coming in and poking their finger in everyone's eye.
Well, it certainly underscored the importance of Michigan in this race. I think you will tell your grandchildren that Michigan was an important part, but this visit per se didn't change any of the dynamics, I don't think, in this race. Does anybody think that it changed the calculus?
No, I don't think so. And frankly, Michigan has been an important figure in the political conversation nationally since 2016. I mean, we haven't lost our status as a swing state yet, but yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. What was being said in the stump speech by Trump, and it was not very different from what we've heard from Trump in the past. This is a very similar message to what he has been saying to these voters before. I do think a lot of people have mentioned that Biden's visit was significant because it was further than most presidents have gone in supporting striking workers, but in the long term, I think they are sort of fighting for the same crop of voters, but it probably didn't change the political conversation too much.
And I know in past elections there's been this idea that former President Trump and his campaign have argued that maybe UAW leadership wasn't with President Trump, but that the rank and file were with him. And so to one of your previous questions about why would President Biden come, this is a play for the people who are actually on the assembly line or actually out on the picket line to show that he is standing with them. There's this fear that Democrats are losing blue-collar Midwest voters to somebody like a President Trump, and something like this is obviously a push by Biden and Democrats to kind of avert that in Michigan and potentially other swing states.
Well, listen, don't kid yourself. There are Trump voters on the UAW line, are there not?
And that's why Trump went to Macomb County, because there's plenty of them up there. We should know that Trump went to a non-union auto supplier, couldn't find a union
Which sort of took the edge off of I'm pro-union, didn't it?
No, it sort of took the edge off. I'm talking to striking auto workers. When Craig Mauger went up to a couple of them, were holding signs like auto workers for Trump, and he said, "Where do you work?" "Oh, we don't work for the auto industry." And then someone else is holding up a sign, union members for Trump. "What union are you part of?" "Well, we're not part of a union." So it had a staged feel to it. That said, we should take note that Trump is doing exactly what Trump did in 2015 when he railed against Ford for building a new truck plant down in Mexico. And he used that day in, day out. And he's using this with this issue of electric vehicles. He went to an auto supplier that makes engine parts, transmission parts. This is the kind of company that Donald Trump says will not exist if we all are driving electric vehicles in 10 years. And you know what? He's actually right about that. But that's something that the Democrats and Biden have not been able to figure out how to message and counter.
Well, that's a tough needle to thread, because the message from Mr. Biden is, if you'll wait with me long enough, I will help create new jobs for UAW workers. In the meantime, those jobs are going away. So what's more important, long-term delayed gratification or putting food on the table tonight?
Well, I would think that's something that UAW worker would answer, but I do think it was important for Biden to get in front of these workers, mainly because he has railroaded for this EV transition, and I think that is part of the contract discussion, contract negotiations, as far as where UAW workers are in the long term and how they are a part of this EV transition that he's been championing. He needed to get in front of workers and tell them that, hey, I still support you all. I support these pay increases, and I support you all being here for the long term.
But I'm not sure a billboard in Detroit trumps Donald Trump's rhetoric.
No, and then to add to things this week, probably more significant event that preceded the two men coming to town was Ford Motor Company put a halt on a construction of its $3.5 billion EV battery plant in Marshall that the state has poured over $1 billion of taxpayer subsidies into. This is literally Gretchen Whitmer's entire economic plan right now, and it's been put on hold. And that's another thing that just kind of adds to the tension here. Is if they can't get a labor deal that Ford says is tenable for them to operate this plant, that deal goes away. And the future replacement jobs, the replacement of the engine jobs, the battery jobs, those all will go away as well.
Well, look at the Republic. Go ahead, David.
I think it's really important to note that according to the Marshall Area Economic Development Alliance, the local economic development entity in Marshall, Ford has stopped work on this massive site. No one else has stopped work on the site. That includes Walbridge, the massive contractor who has a $178 million contract to build out the infrastructure to put any plant on this site. I asked Ford what they actually stopped. Nobody's told me yet. I asked the MEDC what they actually stopped. Nobody's told me yet. I asked MEDA what actually stopped at the plant. Nobody's told me yet. So I think that part of this, and we've talked about this from the very beginning, this is a strategic play. Now, whether or not that strategy is a good play is a different question, and you can argue that this is a black eye for Democrats and for Gretchen Whitmer, who have gone out on a limb for not only this plant, but lots of other economic development plants. But the idea that Ford can say it's pausing something at a site and then nobody can say exactly what it's pausing at the site is a little bit odd.
It's a signal. Look I was working at the typewriter, at the computer. I'm dating myself here, okay? And the phone rings, and who's on the phone but Pete Hoekstra? Skovic, did you hear that they're shutting down the Ford plant? No, I had not heard that, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much. Look, the Republicans tried to frame this, that they caused this, that the lobbying by Tim Walberg and John Mullen somehow convinced Ford. Isn't this just part of the nading dance on the negotiations, that Ford sent a signal? Unless we get a good deal on the EV workers, this plant might not go?
We have gotten the impression, and I think probably everybody else can too, that this wasn't necessarily information that Ford or others wanted to leak at that exact moment. And I think that there's a question about how tactically this is going to work. We've seen the UAW come out and say that this is a bad idea and that they don't like this news. But there are questions about, well, they would probably need to renegotiate a contract for a 2026 EV plant anyway, and that EV plant standards are a little bit different than some of the other factories that they're working at. And, they're talking about getting rid of pay tiers anyway, which could affect the pay. We all know that there's economic analysis that talk about how much money they're going to make at a plant and the trickle down from that. That's, of course, based on previous contract numbers and arguably voodoo math, not on whatever this contract's going to pay. So all of that can change, and everybody knows all of that's going to change anyway. Again, whether or not this is a strong tactic is up for debate. I will note, too, that anytime I talk to local residents in that town who don't like this plant, they tell me that they haven't heard from not only Governor Whitmer, but any of the Republican lawmakers who are in that area.
The state gave more money this week,
exactly.
$65 million, so they're not worried.
Yeah, I think Dave makes a great point in the sense that the train has left the station on a lot of this stuff. Are they going to stop MDOT from doing all of these infrastructure projects that have already been approved? They already have the money for it. I think Ford, expressing hesitation is certainly a pretty big signal, and does pose a lot of potential, election time issues for Democrats if it does not go through. But there's a lot of things already happening on that site that are not all necessarily controlled by Ford at this point.
One of the things Hoekstra and Walberg and Molinар rail against Ford partnering with CATL, which is the world's leading maker of lithium-ion batteries for cars. I don't see those three railing against Elon Musk importing CATL batteries to put in Teslas, or Honda importing them to put into Hondas being built in Ohio. And this is what Ford was trying to do. They were trying to bring the technology that they don't have. And all the Republican lawmakers are like, oh, we need to be able to innovate. We need American companies to build this technology. Well, too late. The Chinese have beat us to the game on this. And it's either the Chinese or the South Koreans. Nobody's throwing a fit about GM partnering with a South Korean company to build a battery plant 10 miles west of here in Delta Township so that it can supply batteries to the Delta Township and Lansing assembly plants. So when those gas vehicles go away, they're replaced by EVs. That's the whole strategy. Get the battery plants near the assembly plants, and the politicians, particularly the Republicans here, are just not either acknowledging that or not understanding it.
But they will try to exploit it nonetheless.
Yes, they will.
I mean, if we can get some answers about transparency, which, I mean, we as journalists have been calling for since the beginning. I mean, even residents in these Marshall areas, they've been asking for transparency as far as what's happening to the community around them. If we could just get some answers about where this money is specifically going, what the production is looking like on this plant, I mean, I think that will clear up a lot of the confusion rather than just making it talking points about, you know, what side did what.
Does anybody around this table believe that that Marshall plant will not be built?
I think something absolutely will be built there. I think there are questions about what it's going to be. Will it most likely be this EV plant with Ford and Cattle? Probably.
What else would they turn it into?
Well, if you listen
stand?
at this meeting this week where they gave out $65 million for more site prep, we heard that the CEO of the MEDC, Quentin Messer, said that they've gotten calls this week from people there who either want to, quote unquote, co-locate with Ford and Cattle at the site, or who are potentially interested in other large sites. So they're billing this as like, we need to build out a massive mega site with infrastructure anyway. They tell us all the time that states in the South have been building out the infrastructure, so sewer lines, roads, electricity at mega sites all the time, and that this is just what they're doing, what Walbridge and other people are doing anyway at this site. Again, though, if Ford actually left, I think it would be a pretty big shock.
There's some truth to that. I mean, the mega site near Memphis that Ford is building an EV battery plant and assembly plant. That went through multiple iterations. Different companies started looking at it and then didn't land. It was already all built out. The roads, the sewer, utility. I mean, that's been the argument from the start. Is the state needs to get in the business of that, anyways. Make things pad ready so that we can attract a big fish.
All right, let's turn the page to the criminal sheet with Rick Johnson, the former Speaker of the House, 55 months in the slammer.
Yeah, this has been playing out for a long time. He pleaded guilty earlier this year. We saw a lot of very interesting court documents come out in terms of what those bribes actually were, including paying for commercial sex work, among getting cash, private flights, etc. So this has been a very, very big story that has played out in the sense that it's not exactly clear, if this is over. We've seen the sentencing of almost all of them. We've got the other two lobbyists next month, but they haven't closed the investigation yet. So I guess we're still waiting to kind of see if Rick Johnson is the big fish or if they've got other things coming here.
This story, correct me if I'm wrong here, folks. Rick Johnson, a lot of people knew this guy, never saw this part of him that he wanted to live this high life and do the stuff that he did. Wasn't this a surprise that this speaker was in trouble?
Well, yes, everyone has their eyes on other speakers, but the bigger part of this story is the prosecutors laid out a case that this thing was rigged from the start.
Before he even got the appointment.
Before he got the appointment, that he was lining himself up for this, and that him and these lobbyists procured some $2 million of contracts and got a bunch of work lined up and used their influence. And then something happened in the appointment process that former Senate Majority Leader Arlen Meekhof has not answered for. Why did Meekhof want Johnson there? Because the prosecutors say that Johnson was basically set up as a patsy who was going to do favors for people. And we're not talking, I mean, what they recorded is $112,000 of value, and they use value including the sex, and along with the cash. And I mean, they found text messages. It was so brazen and so just, kind of dumb that Rick Johnson would just text his wife like days after getting appointed by Snyder, "Hey, you're going to have to take the contract." And you'll get the money, and then we'll be fine, and and people will basically have to come to me and get. And then these lobbyists, they were even more brazen. I mean, this Vince Brown, the guy went on and bought a $190,000 Lamborghini, and didn't think that was going to not draw any attention to himself.
It was brazen to the point of being comical. They used Batman as his code name in these text messages, as though someone wouldn't see through that. It is almost comical. economically.
Set up some kind of a man cave for him. I'm not sure if that's the cave and the Batman is all connected. But
Well, the Snyder administration initially opposed his appointment because he was a lobbyist to this position. Am I not correct?
multiple people around Rick Snyder and former legislators say he was opposed to this, but ultimately caved. That Meekhoff it lingered for months, and Meekhoff just kept going back and asking and saying, this is who I want, and eventually Snyder caved. And that's a really telling aspect of this story that we haven't quite got a full answer either out of the feds or out of the politicians.
Well, the interesting thing about this sentence, the average for this kind of bribery thing was 23 months in prison. He got 55. The court was sending a message.
You know, I think that is, to me, one of the more interesting parts. I think all of us on this table and every journalist in America, frankly, has probably covered some trial of some quote-unquote corrupt politician where they have gone to jail for doing something, maybe not exactly like this. I don't know about Batman, but they've done something, right? And then, of course, in a year, 6 months, something else, we see something else come out, right? I don't know if these sentences are disincentives, and I'm wondering, and I don't have an answer to this, I'm wondering if the idea of term limits in Michigan, where lawmakers are cycling through and they're not in the Capitol watching somebody that they worked with be investigated, is not having the same sort of disincentive effect as it would. Now, of course, there are other places that don't have term limits, like Tennessee, and the FBI raids the Tennessee Capitol about every 10 years, right? And the same people are there, and they watch them come in. But I don't know. I don't know if even if it is a much higher sentence, if it's going to have this disincentive impact that potentially prosecutors and taxpayers would want.
I mean, Rick Johnson has been Speaker of the House in almost 20 years. I mean, he was lingering around town. He wasn't Karub and Associates or Kelly Cawthorn. Him and Lou Dodak, two former speakers.
Put on a shingle.
There are two former speakers who had a name who once were somebody in this town.
They were trying to replicate the Bobby Krim and Bob Vanderlaan thing, which created GCSI.
Yes, and they didn't create that by any means. And so, yeah, it just the whole thing stunk from the start. I mean, to be honest, why would he be quitting his paid lobbying job for a non-paid job? Why did the legislature create a non-paid board? Why did the legislature create a board to begin with? I mean, there's a bunch of questions here about what went on and why they set this up, and the investigation really does point to that there was something rigged here from the start.
All right, let's turn to the no-fault car insurance thing. This is the infamous Mike Duggan, Gretchen Whitmer, Republican legislature with the reform, which the court said close but no cigar.
Yeah, so Senate Democrats have introduced what advocates, car crash survivors, healthcare providers for these survivors have wanted for a long time, which is a change in how accident care, or care for accident victims, rather, is reimbursed.
For catastrophic care. Let's
Yes.
underscore that
Yes.
these are people that are really in bad shape.
That are going to be in care for decades, if not the rest of their lives. And so in this particular case, it doesn't necessarily impact too many drivers on the front end, but for the people who have been trying to get access to this care, have seen reduced access to care, it is a very big deal for them.
7,000 of them.
Yes, and so we're seeing Senate Democrats sort of take up this charge. We had not seen the Republican majority in previous sessions interested in going back to the table on auto insurance reform. And insurance providers are arguing that this could potentially cause rates to creep back up if the fee schedules change. So I think there's still a lot of conversations to be had, but it is a pretty big signal that the Democratic caucus in the Senate is taking on this case now.
There's a realization among lawmakers that when you cut someone's pay by 45%, it's going to be hard for them to keep doing their job, and that's what happened. You took you took these home health care aides who they work for a business. They were paid. The business was paid $20 an hour. They paid the aide $14 an hour, and then they got cut by 45%. So then they were paid. I'm doing math on the fly here. I'm sorry, $12.50 an hour or something along that lines. The company gets paid $12.50. Then they got to pay someone within $12.50 with taxes and insurance and all that. And anybody that just understands just math understands that does not work when you can make $15 an hour at McDonald's right now. So they literally decimated an entire industry and a model that worked for a lot of people who are literally the voiceless among us. And not only can they not walk, they can't talk, and they can't speak for themselves. And the legislature just kind of haphazardly did this, just hours before the Memorial Day break in 2019, and didn't look back. And some lawmakers are really trying to figure out how to fix this with set rates that they want to put in law that would ensure that these businesses could actually care for these folks.
And there's a lot on the legislative agenda for the rest of the year. However, because this is the first time taking a look at this law in years, I mean, you've had injury victims at the Capitol every session since this change went into place. I think it would be really imperative for the majority to take a really thoughtful approach during committee meetings and during session and really listen to the sides of injury victims, as well as medical providers and auto insurers, to ensure that they are doing what's right by Michiganders, and that this doesn't have to be taken another look at, 5 years down the road.
Well, with the court saying that what you did was illegal, the legislature really has no choice to let these people wallow out here or to do something about it.
Sure, right? And I think, as Chad and everybody else has said, this has been an issue that the legislature is aware of. It's not like advocates haven't been there telling them exactly what the court said.
If Chad is correct, which he always is, if he is correct, why didn't somebody in the room say, here are the unintended consequences if we go there?
For years, we had what I call the no-fault fire drill, where both sides would try to get a bill going, and then the other side would try to kill it. And the medical providers and the hospital association, the trial attorneys forever held people together, held their coalition. And then came along the insurers, and the insurers eventually just found enough Republicans and Democrats and the mayor of Detroit to piece together a coalition. They got the votes, they passed the bill, they won for a while.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how good was this program?
Oh, it's always a 10.
Yeah, clearly, no question about it.
Top ranked.
And thanks to all of you. Everybody have a safe weekend. See you back here for more Off the Record next week.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan Public Television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.